Final community, welcome. I set up a challenge with Michael Muller here, and the goal was to select 7 jazz albums that were non-Blue Note that are easily accessible for folks. And so both of us have been racking our heads the past few days thinking about what we were going to pull. And so I think both of us have selected 7 albums that are accessible to folks and are pretty, in terms of listening ability, if you're new to jazz, they are some of the perfect albums out there to go off and grab and try and get into jazz. So with that, Michael, welcome. I would like for you to start first. What album are you going to start with?
Thanks for having me, Paul. So if you don't follow me, I will do a quick recap, just very briefly. I got into jazz because of Paul, pretty much, in at least the audiophile jazz world in the VC. Just started researching some jazz and stumbled across his channel along with Poetry on Plastic, a few others. But it was really helpful for me in my own listening in my world, just to kind of hear what they said, and especially with some needle drops that BarakaPDub does, and finding the artists that I like, finding the instruments that I like, and going from there. And I think a lot of people get scared off by jazz when they hear the wild, free stuff, and they don't realize, like myself, that there's a lot, the history of jazz coming through the middle of the 20th century. There's a lot of ballads, and there's a lot of very mellower music that maybe could provide an easier entry point into the genre as a whole. And for me, that really started with trio jazz. So typically a jazz trio is upright bass, piano, and drums. And of all the trios that are out there, one that really stood out to me is the Bill Evans trio. This album in particular, Moonbeams, this is on Riverside Records. This has been repressed countless times. There are some great affordable OJC pressings of this. This happens to be a Analog Productions copy, but this is just perfect evening music. Very approachable, not too somber, not too upbeat, just the right mood. Dead simple instrumentation, beautiful upright bass, the drums by Paul Motion, and of course the piano by Bill Evans. This is, I believe, this is his 3rd or 4th release as the trio in the early 60s, but classic album. And as far as I'm concerned, from the Bill Evans trio, you can't really steer too wrong with this one.
And that came out after Live at the Village Vanguard, right?
I'm not exactly sure when this came out in terms of, yep. So on the back it says 4, 5, yeah. So this is after Portrait in Jazz, Live at the Village Vanguard, and I think this is after Waltz for Debbie as well.
But that is one that I don't have, and
oh really?
I'm gonna have to seek that one out. So I know you're a big Bill Evans fan. So can you recall when you first heard him?
I'd heard the name, and I'd seen this cover before. I believe this is Nico, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay.
Please correct me if I'm wrong. Someone told me that. I've never fact checked that on my own. Who knows? We don't know. Beautiful lady. Anyway.
Yeah, and I love the simplicity of the cover.
And there is a documentary on Amazon Prime about Bill Evans, if you're interested in hearing more about his story. But he was just a complete virtuoso of the piano. You can see him there kind of hunched over. But the Sunday at the Village Vanguard and Waltz for Debbie are both live recordings, which sound impeccable. You can hear in the background of the room and the glasses tinkling. And then, I mean, it just feels like you're in that room listening to them. This is a studio recording. Actually, Chuck Israels was on bass. So this is the original bassist from the trio. Scott LaFaro had already passed away by this point, I guess. Yeah. I think this has Polka Dot and Moonbeams and Stairway to the Stars, and It Might As Well Be Spring, and some good standards on here, as well as a few originals from Evans.
I do not have that one. I'm going to have to check it out based on your recommendation.
It's great. All right, what do you have for us?
All right, so it just wouldn't be me without Art Blakey, because Art Blakey is what really got me into jazz. And for me, his work with Monk, this particular album is just fantastic. Now, this features his second lineup, which featured Bill Hardiman, Spanky DeBrest, and a couple other folks. This is the only time that Monk and Art recorded for Atlantic Records. And Monk kind of felt like he owed Art Blakey, and because Art played on a number of Monk's recordings for Prestige and a couple of recordings on Riverside. So this is the only time that Monk ever played truly as a sideman. He did a record with Miles Davis, which was the Jazz All-Stars, which is it's an interesting record because Monk is all over the place. They stop, but this features all of Monk's compositions played by him and the Jazz Messengers. And you can find copies of this relatively easily. This is a third press of the record that I happened to find. The original was on the black label, Atlantic and green label. So I think they used the green label for stereo and black for mono. But, you know, the story is that this is the first time that Monk was ever recorded in stereo. So,
wow.
Yeah, this is a one-shot album. It did get a wonderful reissue by Analog Spark, mastered by Kevin Gray. And you can still find copies of this on Discogs for, you know, $45, $50. I think it's out of print on their website. I haven't checked, but you don't have to pay hundreds of dollars for this record. And even if you get, you know, a later reissue like I have, it just sounds fantastic.
What was the original issue date for that album?
So, good question. This came out in '58, and I think it was recorded right before Art signed his contract with Blue Note. So he did a couple of Jazz Messengers records with Blue Note. So he did Live at the Cafe Bohemia. He did the Birdland album, and then he did 3 albums with Columbia. He was looking to re-sign with Blue Note again, and he did this one-off album, and I think Monin came out right before this. Mm-hmm. So he recorded this before he did his next big Blue Note contract.
Cool. Yeah, I've never heard that album.
Yeah, it's so, you know, if you're into Monk, Monk liked to record his tunes many times over, but you know, it's comprised of 6 tracks, and it's all Monk standards, and it's just wonderful.
Great. I've definitely seen that shown around a little bit, but never checked it out. I need to. Yes,
I recommend it. All right, number 2, Michael, what you got?
Okay, number 2 for me. If you've done any digging in the vinyl world on YouTube, you've probably come across the guy Michael Fremer. Hate him or love him, he does have some knowledge on the genre and pressings and whatnot. He has a video where he shows the top 100 in-print analog records or something of that nature, which is a long-form video, and there's a lot to digest, and you have to watch it several times to get it. One that he does show that I can stand by is an earlier pressing, originally released in the early 50s on Columbia, is Duke Ellington Masterpieces. This, of course, has some of his classic tunes on it, namely Mood Indigo. This is kind of some early orchestral jazz. Duke, of course, was a pianist, but a wonderful arranger. This has some beautiful female vocals on it. And I believe this is kind of, correct me if I'm wrong, Paul, that a lot of these pieces were the first time he was able to extend his instrumentation, extend the length of his songs to be cut on the 33 and to get it onto a disc. This is from Analog Productions, which in my opinion is the best version of these. This is a 33 cut, and they also just repressed the double 45 RPM. So those are available now on the Acoustic Sounds. But this sounds incredible, very, very lush, dynamic. The quiet parts are very quiet, and the loud parts are very full and rich. It never distorts, it never gets brittle. It's really beautiful, very easy listening. Nothing too, esoteric or too heady. It's just very simple, beautiful music.
Yeah, and I think Ryan K. Smith mastered that version, didn't he?
I believe so.
Yeah, and you're right. If I recall correctly, yeah, he did extend the compositions because he was originally doing 78s, of course, and the 78s you only had about a little over 3 minutes of recording time.
Right. And yeah, I just double checked. We got RKS Sterling in the dead wax there.
Nice.
So Ryan K. Smith, you also mentioned Kevin Gray, Bernie Grunman. I would say those are three of the top names that are doing the remasterings for these reissues for all the kind of mid-century stuff, at least.
Yeah, if folks are looking to get into Ellington, yeah, that I do recommend that one. That is a great album.
Mm-hmm. Yep. All right.
All right.
Number 2.
All right. So my next one was just dropped by Analog Productions, and that is Peggy Lee's Black Coffee on Decca. It's interesting because when I first started getting into jazz music on vinyl around 2011, I had to get this album. I've had several recordings of Peggy Lee on CD. This is the album to get. It's just wonderful vocal jazz. It's bluesy at times. It has some pop. And in terms of the overall package and just the quality, this surpasses an original. And even the originals, I think I got my original in the dollar bin, and my original was VG. And I got to say, I prefer this version because it was just dropped. You can easily get it for $27. And the opener, Black Coffee, if you like Billie Holiday, it is so bluesy, and the way her intonation is, it sounds like Billie Holiday is singing, to be quite honest. She's often overlooked, and this was her first full-fledged album before she was recording a bunch of singles. And this was originally issued on a 10-inch record, and then they expanded it in 1956 to become a full-fledged album. So she recorded 4 more songs for this version. And if there is a vocal jazz record that is in my top 10, this one will always be there.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah, sorry for all the glare.
High gloss.
Yes, high gloss.
I'll never know a Sunday in this weekday.
And so that one is through the Acoustic Sound series they're doing?
Yes, yep.
Great.
Yeah, and I think it was dropped one or 2 months ago.
That sounds good. That's been in my wish list for a while. I need to pull the trigger.
Yeah, I go off and sample it online because it's varied, but I like the bluesier numbers that she does, including the title track. The title track is a must for me.
Mm-hmm. That's great. If people were like the vocal jazz, who are some other names that you might recommend? You mentioned Billie Holiday, obviously.
Yeah, so of course there's Billie Holiday, there's Ella Fitzgerald. Then, if you go off, a little more into the loungy side of things, I highly recommend Julie London. Julie London is one that Acoustic Sounds has hit a couple times because her records are just so good. I'm trying to think of some of the other ones. So Lena Horne isn't bad. Eartha Kitt did some good records during this time. And then there's some lesser known artists that aren't coming to me right now, but I'll continue to think about it.
I just picked up the Helen Merrill reissue.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Which is great, which kind of fits in that kind of same category.
Yeah.
Beautiful stuff. Should I go now?
Yeah.
Next one.
Yeah,
all right.
Next one.
Paul and I both tried to pick ones that weren't super obvious. None of the classics that you've already seen and heard a million times. But this is one that is pretty well known, and Kraft Recordings has recently reissued an all analog cut by Kevin Gray on 180 gram vinyl. I think it's like $24.99. That is Chet. This is a mono version from Analog Productions from years ago, but the new cut is stereo, and this is just mellow, moody, beautiful, beautiful. Of course, Chet Baker was a vocalist and also a trumpeter, and just this album is exceptional. It has got some Cole Porter, some Tad Dameron, Rogers and Hart. This features Pepper Adams on baritone sax, Bill Evans on piano, Kenny Burrell on guitar, Paul Chambers on bass, and it has Connie Kay and Philly Joe Jones kind of switching off drums. So, and then Herbie Mann on flute. But exceptional musicianship. This is so beautiful. I'm not sure when this was originally recorded. Forgive me, but check this out. Chet, if you're into kind of like the mellower side of things, which is how I came into jazz. So this is just so easy to listen to. I mean, even if you don't like it really, it's like hard to you don't dislike it. You know what I mean? There's nothing offensive about it. There's nothing too cerebral. It's just easy and so beautiful. Yeah, Kenny Burrell on guitar. If you ever see his name, you know it's going to be good. If you ever see Philly Joe Jones, if you ever see Paul Chambers, of course, they released a lot of stuff on Blue Note. So this was on Riverside, but highly worth a check out at least.
Excellent album. One of my favorite from Chet.
Yep, me too. All right, who do you have next, Paul?
All right, so that's actually the perfect segue into my next album, because Chet recorded with this guy and Gerry Mulligan when they were first starting out, and that's Chico Hamilton. So Chico, Gerry Mulligan, and Chet were all recording together on the West Coast. And so, in terms of West Coast players, they had their own kind of relaxed, chilled out vibe. And, Chico really cut his teeth with Chet and Gerry. So he went off to form his own quintet, which kind of will lead into my next record. But this is just smooth and relaxing jazz. And I was really introduced to this album through watching Jazz on a Summer's Day, which is a wonderful documentary that came out either in the late 50s or early 60s, which documents the Newport Jazz Festival from 1958. And that documentary features the Chico Hamilton Quintet. And a lot of people are fans of Eric Dolphy. Eric Dolphy started with Chico Hamilton. And so that documentary features Eric Dolphy. So there were a number of players that went through Chico Hamilton's quintet. Now, Chico Hamilton is a drummer. Is he of the same caliber of an Art Blakey or an Elvin Jones or a Philly Joe Jones? No, he had his own style. But in terms of composition and getting players, he was just fantastic. And he did a slew of albums for Impulse. He did a bunch of wonderful albums in the 70s. And all of his stuff you can find really, really cheaply. Like this album, an original press from the mid 50s, you can still buy for like 20, 25 bucks in reasonable condition. So if you see a Chico Hamilton record, you know, it's really smooth West Coast jazz. I'd say go for it.
What is that pressing?
So this is original. And it's funny because before this video, Michael and I were talking about Amoeba. And I like to order records from Amoeba when I see them online. And this was actually an Amoeba purchase. And this is on Pacific Jazz. So original deep groove. And I think I got it for 20 bucks through Amoeba. It was a VG Plus record.
Great. That's amazing. The documentary you mentioned, Jazz on a Summer's Day, do you think that's on YouTube? Or is it?
It's worth checking out. So I got it through iTunes, and you know, it's wonderful because if I remember correctly, it features Thelonious Monk, has wonderful performances by Louis Armstrong. You got Chico Hamilton, Anita Day. That's another vocal jazz player that is featured in the documentary, and her performance is great too. Great,
cool. All right. Well, you talked about Gerry Mulligan, so I'm going to do one of my favorite Mulligans. Gerry Mulligan was a baritone sax player, and this is an album he did on Riverside with Thelonious Monk, and it's aptly titled "Mulligan Meets Monk." This is an exceptional album. Beautiful instrumentation. Again, Monk, the great pianist, one of the great pianists of jazz. This is an OJC, Original Jazz Classics reissue from the 80s, and it sounds great. Analog Productions did do a version of this, which is a lot of money. This one sounds great. This was recorded in '57. It's got Wilbur Ware on bass and Shadow Wilson on drums. So this is a quartet. Beautiful, beautiful music. This is another one. It gets a little more, not bombastic, but there's a little more complexity going on. Of course, Monk was a pretty complex in his music, in his writing and his phrasing, but it's really fun, and like the distance and the juxtaposition between that deep low baritone sax and kind of the higher register of Monk's playing is really beautiful. So Mulligan has a very kind of breathy sound. You can really hear kind of his air coming across the reed on his sax. And of course, Monk is just a very animated, lively pianist. So this is a cool one to check out as an entry point to Monk and to Mulligan.
Yeah, I love that album, and you know, I'd say that Mulligan paired well with Monk, and from what I've read, they weren't sure how well they were going to work together because Mulligan being from the West Coast side, and then Monk, you know, he has a unique way of playing, and even John Coltrane, who played with him for about 6 months and recorded a couple of records with him. John Coltrane said up front that he had a hard time playing with Monk because of the way he played. But I love that record. That's a fantastic record. And it was a nice pairing between the two.
Mm-hmm. It really is. I wanted to show one Mulligan, and another one I will mention. A lot of people like the Dave Brubeck Timeout. So the alto saxophone player, Paul Desmond, also has a couple records with Mulligan, which are repressed in easy, Speaker's Corner did one, and ORG, I believe, did one. Two of a Mind is one, and what's the other one I'm thinking of? Blues Out of Time, which MoFi did a version of. So Mulligan's cool, Monk is great. Check those names out if you're unfamiliar.
Great album. All right. So coming out of the Chico Hamilton Quintet, I have to show this one by Gabor Szabo, which is a guitarist from Hungary. And he was able to escape to the United States in the 50s, and he made it all the way to Berkeley, where he started playing. And, you know, he went to the Newport Jazz Festival, and he drew a lot of attention. And so Chico saw him. And so he played with Chico. Now, the thing that I like about Gabor Szabo is, you know, he is a nice person that if you're into rock, and you're curious about jazz, I would check out some of his records, because he did probably 5 or 6 records on Impulse. And then he did 3 records with Sky. And this is one of his records on Sky. But most of his records have, they're like half original compositions, and the other half are his arrangements on rock songs. But he had such a unique way of playing, and you know, he came from a Hungarian folk playing background, and so he incorporates that into his jazz. And this is the VNP, Vinyl Me Please pressing of this album. Now, I don't know if this one is still available, but it's funny because 3 months before Vinyl Me Please did their drop, there was a European issue of this very same album. Pressed at GZ. I don't know who the mastering engineer is, but in terms of the music, that's what you really should go for here. And really, if you're looking for OG pressings, all of his stuff, especially his Impulse records, you can find cheaply. Like I picked up a VG Plus Impulse record of his a couple of weeks ago, and I got it for $25. And you know, his style is different from the Grant Greens, the Kenny Burrells, like we just mentioned, the Wes Montgomerys. I mean, Wes Montgomery did some rock tunes on some of his Verve titles, but I find Gabor Szabo totally unique. He died in '82, and unfortunately, we didn't get to see where he was going to go. But his '60s and early '70s output is just fantastic. And this one is Dreams, by the way, and it's aptly titled because it has this dreamy type quality to it.
That's cool. That's a name I've heard so many times and I've never really checked out on my own. So I need to.
You need to. I know you're a big Grant Green fan. You need to check out Gabor Szabo.
Should I start with this one, Dreams?
I would say he did 3 on Sky. So he did 1969, he did Bacchanal, and he did this one, Dreams. I think Dreams is probably the best seller, but I say you can't go wrong with any of those 3 titles. And then his Impulse stuff is just great. It's overlooked. You can find it cheaply.
Great. Pretty cool cover on that one.
Yeah.
Let's see. Okay, next I have an album by a French composer named Michel Legrand. This is his album Legrand Jazz. This is sort of a powerhouse jazz. This guy was from France, and he got a record contract with Columbia to make this album. This features 31 different artists throughout this double album. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. There's about 11 or 12 tracks on here. I mean, the list is Miles Davis, John Coltrane, Bill Evans, Ben Webster, Paul Chambers, Art Farmer, Donald Byrd. It just goes on and on and on. This is a repress by Impex. They did it in 33 and they did a double disc in 45. And it comes with the 45 is a gatefold that has this huge book. But this is great music. There's it's mostly standards, the Jitterbug Waltz. There's the Django Reinhardt one on this. Round Midnight, which is a Monk composition. Fantastic recording. Everything is totally clear and present and quiet in between, and really beautiful. Of course, they've got Davis's name there too, highlighted from when this came out. He was the thing. 58 was when this first was issued. But again, this is, I mean, full going on this. Actually, for you, Paul, there's a version of Night in Tunisia on here. I know you love that one. Michel Legrand. And I believe that Speaker's Corner also did an issue of this, and they thought that was from the original tape, but it actually turned out that it was a copy. So that this one, the Impex version, sounds a little bit better, a little clearer, a little more clarity in the instrumentation and the separation between the instruments, but beautiful one.
Yeah, that's an interesting title because I would say that folks watching us don't necessarily have to go for the Impex pressing, even though the Impex pressing is great. I found an OG of that one in the dollar bin.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I was a little bit frustrated because I got the 33 1/3. And then after they did the 33 1/3, they did the 45 RPM, and it was like,
They snookered you, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Did you get both?
No, I stuck with my 33 1/3. But it's a great record.
Yeah, it is. It's very, like, it's one of those albums you can put on in the morning if you're like making breakfast, or in the afternoon if you're, finished work for the day, or late in the evening if you want to just kind of relax. Easy listening. Good stuff.
Father of Victoria Legrand of Beach House.
Really? I did not know that.
Yep.
That's interesting. Wow. Yep. Cool.
All right. So my next one is kind of an overlooked organist named Charles Earland, and this is Black Talk. And so, try and get rid of the glare here. Charles Earland was just fantastic. In fact, he started out on sax and then transitioned over to the organ. And I want to say he was playing with, it might have been Jimmy Smith at first before he did the transition. And this is late 60s, I want to say. Of course, they don't have the date. 1970. Recorded at Van Gelder Studios. And this features 2 rock songs. So again, a nice transition if you're rock looking into jazz. He does Aquarius and More Today Than Yesterday, which were 2 popular rock and soul songs from the 60s. And, for me, this is just a fantastic listen. So if you're really into jazz organs, so like Jimmy Smith, brother Jack McDuff, are 2 of the bigger organists from the 60s, going into the 70s. But, I think Charles Earland often gets overlooked. And, this is one that I grabbed for like $5, an original. So, definitely do some digging. And if you see Charles Earland, his stuff is really, really good. It's on par with anything that Jimmy Smith, or brother Jack McDuff did, or Jimmy McGriff, who's another big organist.
Cool. Yeah, I've never heard his name. I'm so glad to know this one.
Yeah. Again, I try to feature stuff that's easily accessible that folks might, find some appeal.
Really cool cover too. Great photo.
Yep.
Awesome. Black Talk. Same. Easily accessible. People will find appeal. Everyone, even if you don't know jazz, you've heard the name Miles Davis. You've heard the name John Coltrane. Coltrane has a huge catalog. It's difficult to know exactly where to start. This is one that I just took a chance on. I saw it in the record shop and I pulled it out, and this is Lush Life. This was recently redone in an extreme audiophile one step from Kraft, the Kraft one step. But I mean, you don't have to go that route. This is a great album. This is done by Rudy Van Gelder. This is originally on Prestige. Paul and I were just talking before this video that we kind of prefer Coltrane's Prestige years. But this is great. The song Lush Life is incredible. The title track, and this is a trio, I believe. It's mostly a trio. Donald Byrd is on trumpet on one song. Earl May plays bass, and Art Taylor plays drums, and of course Coltrane on tenor sax. This is great. I hear a Rhapsody, Like Someone in Love, which Blakey and the Jazz Messengers do. But this is great. I mean, it's just beautiful. I don't know how to explain it. It's something you kind of put it on and get lost in immediately. So if you're kind of new into Coltrane, you know, depending on what era of his career you enter, it could sound completely different. But this is one kind of on the more mellower side, I would say, which is kind of got me into Coltrane.
Is that the Analog Productions release of that?
Yeah, this is a single 33 1/3
Okay.
cut from Analog Productions. Yep.
Yeah, and I think OJC did that several times. So yeah, you can find it fairly cheaply. And it's kind of sad because, you know, when it comes to Coltrane, a lot of people look at, you know, you got Blue Train, which is a fantastic album. Then you got all of his Impulse titles and a couple of the Atlantic. But I don't think his Prestige years really are given their proper due. And, you know, in terms of entering the world of Coltrane, I think, you know, the Prestige albums are the perfect place to start.
Yep. Anything he does with Red Garland is really great. And of course, the Ballads that was recently reissued, of course, is on Impulse. But yeah, good entry point for Coltrane on this one.
Excellent pick. All right, so my next one was a bit of VCLT from Teddy at Eat Sleep Vinyl. And it's funny because at the same time I got this album, I also got Enlightenment. I think I got Enlightenment a few months prior to Teddy sending me this one. This is McCoy Tyner. This is Trident. And I just love this version, or I love this record. Out of all of his Milestone output, including Sahara, he did Sahara on Milestone. I think that was one of his first records for that label. It is probably the best known, but I prefer Trident because, you know, it features Ron Carter and Elvin Jones. And this is more hard bop and standards. But what's interesting is he plays the harpsichord on one of the tracks, and it's just wonderful because you don't think of harpsichord when you think of jazz, but the guy makes it work. And, you know, I think when he got into Milestone, Tyner got more experimental because, like Sahara, he was playing the Japanese koto. He also played the flute. And so, you know, he did a lot more than just piano music. And his Milestone records, you can still find really cheaply. I don't think any of them have really gotten a true audiophile reissue, but you can find these easily for under $20 in good condition if you really do some digging. So in terms of his Milestone output, I recommend Trident. And I got to thank Teddy for gifting me this one because I played it a lot.
That's awesome. And how does that one sound?
Oh, it sounds incredible. I mean, it's a 70s pressing of the record. I'm sure if they did a modern day audiophile reissue, it would probably sound better. But, you know, this is 70s vinyl. It's very thin, but for me, it's not so much the pressing quality, it's the music that I'm after, and it is wonderful.
Yeah, I think I remember maybe Teddy even showed that on the video. I know you did, but I wonder if Teddy did as well.
It wouldn't surprise me.
Yep. Okay, so this is the last round, I guess.
Yep, last round.
Last one. We've been talking about acoustic sounds and analog productions. If you're new to the audiophile world, Acoustic Sounds is a website and a web shop. Analog Productions is a reissue label that are owned by the same group of people, and they have this series called the Acoustic Sound series, where they're repressing certain labels' catalogs, certain titles. One of which they just announced that's coming soon is the reissue of the Gil Evans Orchestra Out of the Cool, originally on Impulse. This is Gil Evans was mainly known for his arrangements. He has a lot of cool credits to his name. This is pretty much a full orchestra. You can see there they have a map of all the players who played on it and how they were arranged in the recording. This is absolutely beautiful, kind of orchestral jazz. Very kind of steamy late night sort of feeling. Really great stuff. Kind of taking a cue from the Duke Ellington masterpieces in terms of like a broader orchestration for multiple instruments, but really tying it together. It's very cohesive, very through composed, and every moment there's a certain thing that's happening that kind of captivates you. It's extremely varied, beautiful dynamics. Of course, this is originally on Impulse. This is the Impulse 45 edition from Analog Productions. But I think this just got announced. I'm not sure if the pre-orders are up yet. But there's a great value for this beautiful record. I think those run like in the mid 30s. Is that right, Paul? $35.
Yeah, you can. Yeah, $30, $35, and I hate to promote Amazon, but Amazon has them for $27.
Yep, interesting. And this is produced by Creed Taylor, who's another name. If you see his, CTI, and he has his hands in that era of jazz. All these names you kind of start seeing floating around as you get into the genre. And this is a stereo pressing, which is nice because there's so much going on. It's nice to have that whole field frequency wise to move across. But a beautiful one. The second song is called Where Flamingos Fly, is the highlight.
Yeah, so if there's a Gil Evans album to own, I would say that would be the one I would get. I mean, outside of his work with Miles Davis, because he cut 3 or 4 albums with Miles Davis, but in terms of work he did on his own, that's the one to get for me.
Cool. All right, last one for you, Paul. What do you have for us?
All right, so I want to go with someone modern, and I have to go with Greg Thote. This is his album The Maj, which came out in 2019, and Greg Thote has been extremely prolific. He's been putting out 2 records per year, and in terms of jazz albums from the last decade that have come out, this is probably one of my favorites. So Greg Thote is a organist, pianist from the UK, and he's been influenced by library music. He's been influenced by jazz music, soundtracks. This is very interesting because it starts out with a vocal piece, so it mixes psychedelia with jazz music, and it's one of those pieces where you have to play it from beginning to end. It's kind of a concept album in its own right, but he did such a great job in the production of this album. I mean, it's on a Stoughton type jacket. pressed on just wonderful vinyl. I can't remember who pressed the record, but it's 180 gram. And this is put out by Athens of the North, which I want to say it's his own label. I'm not 100% on that, but this is one, if you're curious, you can go out and sample on Bandcamp. And again, recent record, you could pick it up fairly cheaply. And, you know, if you're coming from the rock side of the house, this is another one that would ease your access into modern jazz.
Cool. That is a wild cover.
Yeah. And I want to say this also features Moses Boyd and several library players. And Moses Boyd, if folks don't know Moses Boyd, the drummer, he is a wonderful jazz drummer, modern day jazz drummer, who has been putting out records in his own right.
Cool. That's great. Yeah, I've never heard of that. So much to look forward to.
Yeah. So if it works out, you know, when we do the editing of this video, hopefully I can splice in some sound samples here and there, so folks get kind of a sense of what the music's like. And we'll include a list of everything that we've shown in the description below.
Great. And thank you so much, Paul. Thanks for having me.
No, thank you. This was wonderful. It was challenging. So before we kick this off, I mean, both of us were like racking our heads. What do we show? And, you know, that's the challenge, because most folks have a tendency to go Blue Note, but I mean, there's so many great records on other labels that are worth checking out.
Yep.
Well, thanks, Michael. And I guess for everyone, we'll catch you next time.
Yep. See you guys. Thanks.